The stagecoach rattled to a stop in a cloud of dust, so thick Mara could taste it between her teeth. Red Hollow wasn't much to look at. A scatter of wooden buildings bleached gray by years of relentless sun, a main street that looked more like a scar carved into the earth, and people who moved with the slow suspicion of those who'd learned not to trust strangers. Mara climbed down, her boots hitting the packed dirt with a thud that felt louder than it should have. She was tall, taller than most men she'd known, and built solid, the kind of body that came from years of hard work and harder choices. Her dress was patched in 3 places, her hair pulled back in a braid that had given up trying to be neat somewhere around noon, and the only possession she carried with any pride was the cast-iron skillet wrapped in burlap and tied to her worn canvas bag. A woman passing by slowed, eyes flicking up and down Mara's frame with the kind of assessment that left bruises you couldn't see. 2 men loitering outside the saloon stopped their conversation mid-sentence. One of them elbowed the other, and they both grinned, not the friendly kind. "Lord have mercy," one of them muttered, just loud enough to carry. "What did they send us? A circus act?" His friend snorted. "Nah, freight wagon lost a wheel, dropped off the wrong cargo." Mara's jaw tightened, but she kept walking. She'd heard it all before. Different town, same small minds. She didn't come here for approval. The general store sat at the end of the street, its sign dangling from a single rusty chain. She pushed through the door, and the woman behind the counter, thin as a fence post, with eyes like chips of flint, looked up from her ledger. "Help you?" The question had all the warmth of a January wind. "I'm looking for work," Mara said. Her voice was steady, even if her hands weren't. "Heard there might be something at the Voss ranch." The woman's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Amusement, maybe. Or pity. "Voss don't hire women, especially not—" She stopped herself, but the silence finished the sentence for her. "Especially not what?" Mara asked, her tone flat. The woman shrugged. "Ain't my business. But if you're desperate enough to try, you'll find him at the ranch office. 3 miles west. Can't miss it." She turned back to her ledger like Mara had already ceased to exist. Mara left without another word. The walk was brutal. The sun pressed down like a hand trying to shove her into the ground, and by the time she reached the Voss ranch, her dress clung to her back with sweat. The ranch itself sprawled across the valley, fenced pastures, a sprawling barn, corrals filled with horses that looked better fed than half the people she'd seen in town. Men moved through the space with purpose, their faces burned dark by the sun, their movements efficient and indifferent. And then there was the house. It wasn't grand, not in the way rich people back east thought of grand, but it was solid. 2 stories, freshly painted, with a wide porch that looked like it had been built for someone who actually planned to stay. Sitting on that porch, leaning back in a chair with his boots propped on the railing, was a man who could only be Caleb Voss. He was younger than she'd expected, mid-30s maybe, with the kind of face that had seen too much weather and not enough softness. Dark hair, dark eyes, a jaw that looked like it had been carved out of the same granite that made up the land. He didn't look up when she approached, just kept whittling at a piece of wood with a knife that caught the light every time he turned it. "Mr. Voss?" Mara stopped at the base of the porch steps. He didn't answer right away, just kept whittling. Finally, he glanced up, his gaze moving over her in a single sweep that felt less like judgment and more like calculation. "You lost?" "No, sir. I'm looking for work." That got his attention. He stopped whittling, lowered his boots to the porch floor, and leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. "Work?" "Yes, sir." "What kind of work you think a woman does on a cattle ranch?" Mara met his eyes. "The kind that needs doing. I can cook, I can clean, I can work harder than most men you've got, and I don't complain." One of his eyebrows twitched upward. "That's so?" "Yes, sir." He studied her for a long moment, then stood. He was tall, taller than her, which didn't happen often, and when he came down the steps, she had to fight the instinct to step back. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could see the skepticism etched into every line of his face. "You got a name?" "Mara Kincaid." "Where you from, Mara Kincaid?" "East of here, doesn't matter where." His mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. "Running from something." "Running to something," she corrected. "There's a difference." "Huh." He crossed his arms, and she could see the muscles in his forearms shift under his sleeves. I got 12 men working this ranch. They eat 3 meals a day, and the last cook I had quit 2 weeks ago because she said they were animals. You think you can handle feeding animals? I've handled worse. Like what? Mara hesitated, then decided the truth was better than a lie. A logging camp up north, 60 men, 6 months. They didn't scare me then, and your 12 won't scare me now. He stared at her like he was trying to decide if she was brave or just stupid. Finally, he nodded toward the barn. You see that building over there? That's the cookhouse. Kitchen's in the back. You got 1 week. You feed my men, you keep the place clean, and you don't cause trouble. End of the week. We'll talk. Mara blinked. That's it? That's it. Unless you changed your mind. No, sir, I haven't. Good. He turned to head back to the porch, then stopped and looked over his shoulder. One more thing. You fail, you leave quiet. No drama. Understood? Understood. He nodded once and walked away. Mara stood there for a moment, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might crack a rib. She'd done it. She'd gotten her foot in the door. Now all she had to do was not get it slammed on her. The cookhouse was worse than she'd expected. The main room was serviceable. Long wooden tables, benches worn smooth by years of use, a fireplace at one end that looked like it hadn't been cleaned since the place was built. But the kitchen was a disaster. Grease coated the stove in layers so thick she could scrape it off with a fingernail. The counters were cluttered with pots and pans that looked like they hadn't been washed properly in weeks. The floor was sticky in some places and gritty in others, and the whole room smelled like old meat and stale smoke. Mara set her bag down and rolled up her sleeves. She worked through the afternoon and into the evening, scrubbing until her hands were raw and her back screamed for mercy. She hauled water from the pump outside, boiled pot after pot to cut through the grime, and threw out anything that looked like it might kill someone. By the time the sun started to set, the kitchen wasn't clean, but it was cleaner. Good enough to start. The men came in just after dark. She heard them before she saw them, boots on wood, voices low and rough. They filed in and took their seats without a word, and Mara stood at the kitchen door wiping her hands on a rag and trying not to let her exhaustion show. There were 12 of them, just like Voss had said, young and old, scarred and sunburned, all of them looking at her with the same expression, curiosity mixed with doubt. One of them, a wiry man with a mustache that looked like it had a life of its own, leaned back in his chair and grinned. Well, well, boss finally found someone desperate enough to take the job. A few of the others chuckled. Mara didn't smile. Supper's ready, you want it or not? The grin faded. Yeah, we want it. She served them stew, beef and potatoes, thick and hot, with biscuits that were only slightly lopsided. It wasn't fancy, but it was filling, and by the time she'd ladled out the last bowl, the room had gone quiet except for the sound of spoons scraping against tin. The wiry man, his name was Dalton, she'd learned later, was the first to finish. He pushed his bowl away and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. Not bad, he said grudgingly, for a first try. Mara met his eyes. It'll be better tomorrow. We'll see. The week that followed was a war of attrition. Mara woke before dawn every day, her body aching in places she didn't know could ache. She cooked breakfast, eggs, bacon, flapjacks, whatever she could scrape together, and served it to men who ate like they were trying to inhale their food. She cleaned up, prepped for lunch, cooked lunch, cleaned up again, prepped for supper, cooked supper, and cleaned up one last time. By the time she collapsed onto the narrow cot in the corner of the cookhouse, it was usually past midnight. The men tested her, not cruelly, but constantly. They complained about the coffee being too weak, the bacon too crispy, the biscuits too dense. They tracked mud across her freshly scrubbed floors and left dishes everywhere except where they belonged. They watched her, waiting for her to snap, to quit, to prove that she didn't belong. Mara didn't give them the satisfaction. On the third day, Dalton leaned against the doorframe while she was elbow-deep in dishwater. You know, he said casually, last cook we had? She cried every night, could hear her through the walls. Mara didn't look up. Good thing I'm not her. You're tougher, huh? I'm still here, aren't I? He smirked. For now. On the 5th day, one of the younger hands, a kid named Eli, who couldn't have been more than 19, knocked over a pot of beans and just walked away. Mara stared at the mess spreading across the floor, her hands clenched into fists, her jaw so tight it hurt. She wanted to scream. She wanted to throw something. She wanted to march out to the barn and tell Voss she was done. Instead, she grabbed a rag and got down on her knees. By the time she'd cleaned it up, her dress was soaked and her hands were shaking, but the floor was spotless. On the seventh day, Caleb Voss walked into the cookhouse just as she was finishing breakfast cleanup. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there with his arms crossed, looking around the room. The tables were clean, the floor was clean, the kitchen was organized, the shelves stocked, the pots hanging in neat rows. It wasn't perfect, but it was a damn sight better than it had been a week ago. Finally, he looked at her. "You made it." Mara straightened, wiping her hands on her apron. "Yes, sir." "Men give you trouble?" "Nothing I couldn't handle." He nodded slowly. "They said you're hard to rattle." "That what they said?" "Among other things?" He paused. "Some of it wasn't kind." Mara's expression didn't change. "I didn't come here for kind." "No," he agreed. "I don't imagine you did." He walked to the window, looking out at the ranch yard. "You want the job permanent? It's yours, same terms. 3 meals a day, keep the place clean, don't cause trouble." "What about pay?" He named a number. It wasn't generous, but it was fair. More importantly, it was steady. "Deal," Mara said. Voss turned back to her, and for the first time she saw something almost like approval in his eyes. "Good. Welcome to the Voss Ranch, Miss Kincaid." He left without another word. Mara stood there alone in the quiet cookhouse, her heart hammering in her chest. She'd done it. She'd survived the week. She'd earned her place. But as the reality settled in, so did something else, a creeping awareness that the real battle hadn't even started yet. The men might tolerate her now, but tolerance wasn't respect. And respect, she was starting to realize, was the only currency that mattered out here. Outside, she could hear the ranch coming to life. Hooves on dirt, men shouting to each other, the creak of the barn door. Red Hollow had let her in, but it hadn't accepted her. Not yet. Mara looked down at her raw, reddened hands, then out the window at the vast, unforgiving land stretching toward the horizon. She wasn't going anywhere. And if the frontier wanted to break her, it was going to have to try a hell of a lot harder. The first month passed in a haze of flour dust and steam, and Mara learned that surviving the trial week had been the easy part. The real test was proving she could keep up the pace day after day, week after week, without breaking down or burning out. She fell into a rhythm that felt less like living and more like enduring. Up at 4 in the morning to get the stove going, coffee boiling by 4:30, breakfast on the table by 5:15. The men ate fast and hard, shoveling food into their mouths like they were fueling machines. Then they were gone. Out to the pastures, the corrals, the fence lines that seemed to stretch forever into the brutal landscape. Mara would clean up, start prepping lunch, cook lunch, clean up again, prep dinner, cook dinner, clean up one final time. Then she'd collapse onto her cot with muscles screaming and hands that had stopped feeling like her own. Sometimes she'd lie there in the dark, too tired to sleep, listening to the wind rattle the cookhouse walls and wondering if this was all her life would ever be. But she didn't quit. Quitting wasn't in her vocabulary. Hadn't been since she was a kid watching her mother scrub floors in houses that would never be theirs. The men still watched her, but the nature of the watching had shifted. They weren't waiting for her to fail anymore. Now they were waiting to see what she'd do next, like she was some kind of curiosity they couldn't quite figure out. Dalton was the worst of them. He had a talent for showing up right when she was at her most exhausted, leaning against the doorframe with that infuriating smirk, making comments that walked the line between teasing and cruelty. "Coffee's weak again," he said one morning, holding up his cup like it was evidence in a trial. Mara didn't even look up from the biscuits she was cutting. "Then don't drink it. Can't start the day without coffee." "Then I guess you're stuck with weak coffee." He laughed, actually laughed, and some of the other men joined in. It wasn't mean-spirited, not exactly, but it grated on her nerves like sandpaper on sunburn. Eli, the young kid who'd knocked over the beans, was different. He watched her with something closer to awe, like he couldn't quite believe she was real. One afternoon, he lingered after lunch while the others headed back out. "Miss Kincaid?" His voice cracked on her name. Mara glanced up from scrubbing a pot. "What?" "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry about the beans. I should have helped clean it up." She studied him for a moment. He had the kind of face that hadn't quite grown into itself yet, all angles and uncertainty. You're sorry now, or you're sorry because someone told you to be? He flushed. Now. I mean, I was sorry then too. I didn't know what to say. Next time, say nothing and grab a rag. She turned back to the pot. That's all the apology I need? Yes, ma'am. He hurried out, and Mara found herself almost smiling. Almost. Caleb Voss kept his distance. She'd see him around the ranch, always moving with purpose, always focused on whatever needed fixing or handling or deciding. He didn't eat with the men, took his meals in the main house, which was fine by Mara. The less she had to deal with him, the better. He'd given her a chance, and she was grateful for that. But gratitude didn't mean she wanted to be around him more than necessary. Still, she'd catch him watching sometimes, not in the way the other men watched, with doubt or amusement. He watched like he was trying to solve a problem he hadn't quite worked out yet. It made her uncomfortable in a way she couldn't name. 3 weeks into her permanent position, a woman showed up at the cookhouse door. She was small and sharp-featured, dressed in a calico dress that had been mended so many times it was hard to tell what the original pattern had been. Her name was Ruth, and she worked at the general store in town. Heard Voss finally found someone willing to take the job, Ruth said, looking Mara up and down with the same assessment everyone in Red Hollow seemed to specialize in. Didn't think it'd be you. Mara wiped her hands on her apron. Why not? No offense, but you don't exactly fit the mold. Never tried to. Ruth's mouth twitched. Might have been the start of a smile, might have been indigestion. Fair enough. I came by to let you know there's a social next Saturday. Church basement. Whole town turns out. You should come. I'm not much for socials. Didn't ask if you were. I'm telling you it'd be good for you to show your face. Let people see you're not just some strange woman hiding out at the Voss ranch. Mara bristled. I'm not hiding. Then prove it. Ruth turned to leave, then paused. And bring something to the potluck. People judge heavy on the food. She left before Mara could tell her exactly what she thought of that idea. That night, while she was cleaning up after supper, Dalton wandered back into the cookhouse. Most of the men were in the bunkhouse by now, playing cards or sleeping off the day's work. He pulled out a chair and sat backward on it, arms folded over the backrest. You going to the social? He asked. How do you know about that? Ruth's got a big mouth. Whole ranch probably knows by now. Mara kept scrubbing. I haven't decided. You should go. Why? Because if you don't, they'll talk. Say you're too proud, or too scared, or some other nonsense that'll make your life harder than it needs to be. She stopped scrubbing and looked at him. You care about making my life easier now? He shrugged. Just saying. Small towns are like that. They'll tear you apart if they think you're looking down on them. I'm not looking down on anyone. I know that, but they don't. He stood, pushing the chair back with his boot. Bring those biscuits you make. The ones with the honey. They'll shut up real quick once they taste those. He left before she could respond. Mara stood there, hands dripping soapy water onto the floor, and felt the weight of it all pressing down on her shoulders. It wasn't enough to work hard. It wasn't enough to prove she could do the job. She had to make them like her too, or at least stop hating her long enough to see she wasn't a threat. She hated it, hated every single piece of it. But she also knew Dalton was right. Saturday came too fast. Mara spent the morning making biscuits, more than she needed, because if she was going to do this, she was going to do it right. She packed them in a basket, changed into her second dress, the one that didn't have quite as many patches, and walked the 3 miles into town with the sun beating down on her head like a hammer. The church basement was packed. Long tables covered with food lined one wall, and people clustered in groups, talking and laughing with the ease of folks who'd known each other their whole lives. Mara stood in the doorway, basket in hand, and felt every eye in the room turn toward her. The conversations didn't stop, but they got quieter. That was somehow worse. Ruth appeared at her elbow, taking the basket without asking. Good. You came. Now stop looking like you're about to bolt and go say hello to people. I don't know anyone. Then it's time you did. Ruth pulled her toward a group of women standing near the food table. Ladies, this is Mara Kincaid. She's cooking out at the Voss Ranch. The women smiled, but their eyes stayed cold. One of them, blonde, pretty, in a brittle sort of way, looked Mara over with barely concealed disdain. That must be quite the job. All those men to feed. It keeps me busy, Mara said carefully. I'm sure it does. The woman's smile sharpened. I'm Caroline. My father owns the feed store. I've known Caleb Voss since we were children. There was a challenge in the way she said it, like she was staking a claim to something Mara hadn't even thought to want. That's nice, Mara said, because she couldn't think of anything else to say. Caroline's smile turned into something that looked more like a smirk. Yes, it is. She turned back to her friends, dismissing Mara as thoroughly as if she'd walked away. Ruth steered Mara toward the food table. Don't mind Caroline. She's been trying to sink her claws into Caleb Voss for years. Hasn't worked yet, but that doesn't stop her from acting like she owns him. I don't care about Caleb Voss, Mara said, maybe a little too quickly. Ruth gave her a look that said she didn't believe that for a second, but she didn't push. Come on, let's get some food before it's all gone. The afternoon dragged on. Mara made small talk with people who clearly didn't want to talk to her, smiled at jokes she didn't find funny, and nodded along to conversations about people and places she knew nothing about. By the time the sun started to sink, her face hurt from forcing pleasantness she didn't feel. She was getting ready to leave when Caleb Voss walked in. He wasn't dressed fancy, just clean, his shirt pressed, his hair combed back, but there was something about the way he moved that made people notice. Conversations paused. Women straightened. Men nodded in greeting. Caroline practically lit up, moving toward him with the confidence of someone who thought she had a right to his attention. Mara turned away before he could see her and headed for the door. She was halfway down the street when she heard footsteps behind her. Leaving already? She didn't stop walking. Nothing left for me there. Caleb fell into step beside her, hands in his pockets, his stride easy and unhurried. You didn't have to come. Ruth said I should. Ruth says a lot of things. Mara glanced at him sideways. Why are you out here? Caroline looked like she had plans for you. He snorted. Caroline always has plans. Doesn't mean I'm interested. Not my business. No, he agreed. It's not. They walked in silence for a while, the town falling away behind them. The road stretched out ahead, dusty and pale in the fading light. Finally, Caleb spoke again. You did good today. Mara frowned. I stood around and got looked at like I was a two-headed calf. And you didn't run. That's more than most people would have done. He looked at her, and there was something in his expression she couldn't quite read. Takes guts to show up when you know people don't want you there. Didn't have much choice. There's always a choice. He stopped walking, and she stopped too, facing him in the middle of the empty road. You could have stayed at the ranch, could have told Ruth to mind her own business. But you didn't. You showed up, and you held your ground. That matters. Mara didn't know what to say to that. She wasn't used to people acknowledging the effort it took just to exist in spaces that didn't want her. Why'd you hire me? The question came out before she could stop it. Really? Was it because you needed someone that bad? Or was it something else? Caleb was quiet for a long moment, his gaze steady on hers. You want the truth? Always. I hired you because you didn't beg. Everyone who came before you, they either cried or made excuses or tried to convince me they deserved a chance. You just stood there and told me what you could do. No apologies, no sob story, just facts. He paused. I respect that. Mara's throat felt tight. People in town don't. People in town don't know you yet. Give them time. And if time doesn't change anything, then to hell with them, he said simply. You're not working for the town. You're working for me. And as long as you do your job, I don't care what they think. He started walking again, and after a moment, Mara followed. By the time they reached the ranch, the stars were out, scattered across the sky like someone had thrown a handful of diamonds and forgot to pick them up. Caleb stopped at the fork where the path split, one direction toward the main house, the other toward the cookhouse. Get some rest, he said. You've earned it. Mara nodded, but as she turned to go, she found herself saying, Thank you for walking with me. He tipped his head. Any time. She watched him disappear toward the main house, then made her way to the cookhouse, her mind turning over everything he'd said. Respect. He'd said he respected her. It wasn't love. It wasn't even friendship. But out here, in this hard place with these hard people, respect felt like something she could build on. The next few weeks passed without incident, and Mara started to think maybe, just maybe, Things were settling into something she could live with. The men had stopped testing her quite so much. Dalton's teasing had an almost friendly edge to it now. Even Eli had started helping out without being asked, clearing plates and hauling water like he'd decided she was worth the effort. Then the storm hit. It came out of nowhere, the way storms did out here. Sky turning from blue to bruised in the span of an hour, wind picking up until it howled like something alive and angry. By the time the first drops fell, they were heavy enough to leave dents in the dust. Mara stood at the cookhouse window, watching the sky split open, and felt a cold knot form in her stomach. The men came in early, soaked and cursing, shaking water off like dogs. Dalton slammed the door behind him hard enough to rattle the frame. "It's bad," he said, looking at Mara. "Real bad. Boss says we're shutting down work for the day. Maybe tomorrow too if it doesn't let up." "What about supplies?" Mara asked. "I'm low on flour. Almost out of salt." "You'll have to make do. Ain't nobody going into town in this." The storm raged for 2 days straight. Rain came down in sheets so thick you couldn't see 10 feet in front of you, and the wind tore shingles off the barn and sent tools flying across the yard. The men huddled in the bunkhouse, restless and irritable, and Mara stretched her supplies as far as they'd go. On the third day, the rain stopped, but the damage was done. The main road into town had washed out, taking a bridge with it. The creek that ran along the southern edge of the property had swelled into a raging torrent, cutting them off from the rest of the world. Caleb called a meeting in the main yard. All the men gathered, muddy and grim-faced, while he laid out the situation. "We're isolated," he said bluntly. "Bridge is gone. Won't be fixed for at least a week, maybe 2. We've got enough feed for the livestock, but the cookhouse is running low on essentials." "How low?" Dalton asked. Caleb looked at Mara. She'd been standing off to the side, but now everyone turned to look at her. 2 days' worth of flour if I stretch it," she said. 1 day of salt. Coffee's almost gone. Got some beans and dried meat, but not enough to feed everyone if we're stuck here much longer." One of the older hands, a man named Garrett, with a scar running down his jaw, spat into the mud. "So what are we supposed to do? Starve?" "No one's starving," Caleb said sharply. "But we need supplies. Someone's got to make a run to the backup cache." The men exchanged looks. Mara had heard about the cache, a storage shed Caleb kept stocked about 15 miles north, up in the hills where the terrain was rough, even in good weather. After the storm, it'd be damn near impossible. "I'll go," Dalton said. "Not alone you won't," Caleb replied. "Trail's too dangerous. You'll need someone with you." "I'll go," Mara said. Every head turned toward her. Dalton laughed, short and sharp. "You?" "Me. Well, no offense, but you've been here 2 months. You don't know the land. You'll get yourself killed." "Then show me the way," Mara said, looking at Caleb. "I'm lighter than most of your men, easier on the horse, and I know what we need better than anyone else." Caleb's jaw tightened. "It's not a Sunday ride, Mara. The trail's washed out in places. Mud's slick. One wrong step and you'll go over the edge." "I know. Then why the hell would you volunteer?" "Because if we don't get those supplies, we're all in trouble." She held his gaze. "And because I can do it." The silence stretched out, heavy and tense. Finally, Caleb exhaled slowly through his nose. "Fine. You and Dalton leave at first light. Take the bay mare. She's sure-footed. And for the love of—" He stopped himself. "Just be careful." Mara nodded, ignoring the looks from the other men. Some of them looked skeptical. Some looked outright worried, but none of them said a word. That night, she lay on her cot, staring at the ceiling and wondering if she'd just made the stupidest decision of her life. The smart thing would have been to keep her mouth shut, let the men handle it, stay safe in the cookhouse where she belonged. But she'd never been good at doing the smart thing. And she was tired, so damn tired, of letting other people decide what she was capable of. Dalton was waiting when she stepped out into the pre-dawn darkness. He'd already saddled 2 horses, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "You sure about this?" he asked. Mara swung up into the saddle. "Too late to back out now?" "That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting." He muttered something under his breath, but he didn't argue. They rode out as the sky started to lighten, the world still wet and raw from the storm. The trail was worse than she'd expected. Mud sucked at the horses' hooves, and water ran in streams down the hillside, cutting new channels through the path. Twice, the trail disappeared entirely, washed away by the storm, and they had to pick their way through brush and rock, trusting the horses to find footing where there didn't seem to be any. Dalton led, and Mara followed, her hands tight on the reins, her heart climbing into her throat every time the mare slipped or stumbled. She didn't let herself think about what would happen if they fell. Didn't let herself imagine the long drop into the ravine below. She just kept moving. It took them 4 hours to reach the cache. By the time they did, Mara's legs were shaking and her hands were cramping from gripping the reins so hard. The shed was small, barely more than a lean-to, but it was stocked with what they needed: flour, salt, coffee, beans, dried beef wrapped in burlap. They loaded everything into saddlebags, working in silence. Dalton kept glancing at her like he expected her to collapse any second, but Mara kept her head down and her mouth shut. The ride back was harder. The horses were carrying more weight, and exhaustion was setting in for both riders. Mara's back ached, her thighs burned, and her hands were blistered from the reins. But she didn't complain, didn't slow down, just kept riding. They were an hour from the ranch when Dalton finally spoke. "You did good today?" Mara didn't look at him. "We're not back yet." "Still, most people would have quit halfway up that hill." "I'm not most people." "Yeah," he said quietly. "I'm starting to figure that out." They rode the rest of the way in silence. When they finally reached the ranch, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. The men came out to meet them, taking the horses, unloading the supplies. Caleb was there too, his expression hard to read. "Any trouble?" he asked. "Nothing we couldn't handle," Dalton said, sliding off his horse with a grunt. He looked at Mara. She kept up, didn't slow us down once. Caleb's gaze shifted to Mara, and for a moment something passed between them. Acknowledgement, maybe, or understanding. "Good," was all he said. Then he turned and walked back toward the main house. Mara stood there, filthy and exhausted, and felt something shift inside her chest. She'd done it. She'd proven she could handle more than just a kitchen. She'd earned something today, something the men couldn't take away. But as she looked around at the faces watching her, some impressed, some still doubtful, she realized the battle wasn't over. It was just beginning. The supply run changed things, but not in the way Mara had hoped. For a few days, the men treated her differently. Nodded when she passed, thanked her for meals without the usual edge of skepticism. Dalton even helped her haul firewood without being asked, which was so out of character she almost asked if he was feeling sick. But respect in a place like Red Hollow was a fragile thing, and it didn't take much to shatter it. The whisper started about a week after she and Dalton returned. Mara first noticed them in town when she went to pick up a delivery of coffee beans Ruth had ordered for the ranch. The moment she walked into the general store, the conversation at the counter died, like someone had snuffed out a candle. Ruth's expression was carefully neutral as she handed over the package. "Here you go. Tell Caleb the rest of his order will be ready by Friday." "I will, thanks." Mara turned to leave, but she could feel the weight of stares on her back. Here the moment the whispers started up again, as soon as the door closed behind her. She told herself it didn't matter. People talked. That's what they did in small towns where nothing much happened and everyone knew everyone else's business. She'd dealt with worse. But the whispers followed her back to the ranch. She caught fragments of conversations that stopped the moment she got too close. Saw the way some of the men looked at each other when she served their meals, like they were sharing a joke she wasn't in on. It was Eli who finally told her what was being said. He caught her outside the cookhouse one evening, shifting his weight from foot to foot like he was standing on hot coals. "Miss Kincaid, can I talk to you?" Mara set down the bucket of kitchen scraps she'd been about to take to the compost. "What is it?" "It's just—" He rubbed the back of his neck, his face flushing red. "People are saying things. About you and the boss." Her stomach dropped. "What kind of things?" They're saying the only reason you got the job is because Voss feels sorry for you, that he's keeping you around out of charity, not because you actually earned it." Eli looked miserable. "And some people are saying worse stuff, about why you really went on that supply run with Dalton, like it was all part of some arrangement." The word hit her like a slap. Mara's hands curled into fists at her sides. "Who's saying this?" "I don't know. Everyone, I guess. It started in town and spread out here. I don't believe it," he added quickly. "I think it's garbage, but I thought you should know." "Yeah." Her voice came out flat. "Thanks for telling me." Eli lingered like he wanted to say something else, but Mara turned away and picked up the bucket again. She didn't trust herself to speak without her voice shaking. That night, she barely slept. She lay on her cot staring at the ceiling, her mind racing through every interaction she'd had with Caleb Voss, trying to see them through the poisoned lens of town gossip. Had he been too kind? Too willing to give her chances? Had she misread everything? Mistaken basic human decency for something more? Or worse, had everyone else seen something she'd been too blind to notice? The worst part was the doubt. It crept in like water through a cracked foundation, making her question things she'd been certain of just hours before. Had she really earned her place here? Or had Caleb been carrying her all along, too polite or too pitying to tell her the truth? By morning, she'd made up her mind. She was leaving. Not because the gossip was true, it wasn't, she knew that much, but because staying would only make it worse. For her, for Caleb, for everyone. She'd tried to build something here, but the foundation was rotten. Better to cut her losses and move on before she got in any deeper. She packed her few belongings before dawn, moving quietly so she wouldn't wake anyone. Her hands trembled as she folded her spare dress, wrapped her skillet in burlap. Everything she owned fit into the same canvas bag she'd arrived with, which felt like its own kind of failure. She was heading for the door when Caleb's voice stopped her cold. Going somewhere? Mara spun around. He was standing in the doorway of the cookhouse, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. She had no idea how long he'd been there. "I'm leaving," she said, forcing her voice to stay steady. "I'll be gone before breakfast. You won't have to worry about finding someone else." "Why?" The question caught her off guard. "Why do you think?" "I think someone's been filling your head with garbage, and instead of fighting back, you're running." He stepped into the room, and the door swung shut behind him. "That what you do when things get hard? Pack up and disappear?" Anger flared in her chest, hot and sharp. "You don't know anything about me. I know you rode through a damn storm to get supplies for this ranch. I know you've worked harder than half the men I've got. And I know you're too stubborn to quit unless someone convinced you that you should. It's not about being convinced." Mara's grip tightened on her bag. "People are talking, saying I'm only here because you pity me, that I'm some kind of charity case you can't bring yourself to fire." "And you believe them?" "It doesn't matter what I believe. It matters what everyone else thinks." Caleb's jaw tightened. "That's the biggest load of horse manure I've ever heard." "Is it?" She dropped her bag and turned to face him fully. "Tell me the truth, Caleb. Did you hire me because I could do the job, or because you felt sorry for me?" "I hired you because you didn't whine, because you looked me in the eye and told me what you were worth instead of begging for scraps." He took a step closer, his voice low and hard. "I've fired 3 cooks in the past year because they couldn't handle the work. You think I'd keep you around if you weren't pulling your weight, out of kindness? I don't know what to think anymore." "Then let me make it real simple for you." He was standing close enough now that she had to tilt her head back to look at him. "You want to leave because you're tired or because this isn't the life you want? Fine. I won't stop you. But if you're leaving because a bunch of small-minded gossips made you feel like you don't belong here, then you're letting them win. And I didn't take you for someone who gives up that easy." Mara's throat felt tight. "They're never going to accept me." "Maybe not, but I accepted you. The men here accepted you. Hell, even Dalton likes you, and he doesn't like anybody. Since when do you care more about what strangers think than what the people who actually know you think?" She wanted to argue with him, wanted to tell him it was more complicated than that, but the words wouldn't come. Because he was right. She'd spent so much time worrying about what Red Hollow thought of her that she'd stopped paying attention to the people who actually mattered. "I don't know how to fight this," she admitted quietly. "I don't know how to make them stop." "You don't make them stop. You make them irrelevant." Caleb's expression softened, just slightly. "Stay. Prove them wrong. Or leave and prove them right. Your choice." He turned and walked out before she could respond. Mara stood there for a long time, her bag at her feet, her heart pounding in her chest. Then, slowly, she picked up the bag and unpacked it. She hung her dress back on its nail, set her skillet on the shelf, and got to work preparing breakfast like nothing had happened. But everything had happened, and she was done running from it. The next time Mara went into town, she walked with her head up and her shoulders back. She didn't hurry, didn't avoid eye contact. When she passed a group of women who stopped talking the moment they saw her, She nodded politely and kept walking. In the general store, Ruth watched her with something that might have been approval. Heard you're still out at the Voss Ranch. That's right. Good. Would have been a shame to let the busybodies run you off. Mara almost smiled. I'm not that easy to get rid of. I'm starting to see that. Ruth leaned against the counter. You need anything? Just picking up the order Caleb placed last week. While Ruth went to get it, Caroline appeared from one of the aisles. She looked Mara up and down with that same brittle smile, but there was something sharper in her eyes now, something almost mean. Still cooking for all those men? Caroline said. It wasn't a question. Every day. Must be exhausting. All that work for people who probably don't even appreciate it. She tilted her head. Or maybe one of them appreciates it a little too much? Mara felt her jaw tighten, but she kept her voice level. If you've got something to say, Caroline, say it. I'm just making conversation. No, you're fishing, and I'm not biting. Caroline's smile sharpened. People talk, Mara. And when they talk about you and Caleb Voss spending time alone, people start to wonder. Let me stop you right there. Mara took a step closer, and Caroline actually backed up. I don't care what people wonder. I don't care what they say. And I especially don't care what you think. I work at the Voss Ranch because I'm good at my job. If that threatens you or anyone else in this town, that's your problem, not mine. For a moment, Caroline looked genuinely shocked. Then her face hardened. You should be careful. Women like you don't last long in places like this. Women like me? Mara's laugh was cold. You mean women who work for what they have instead of waiting around for some man to hand it to them? Yeah, I've heard that before. Still here, though. Ruth appeared with the order, looking between them with raised eyebrows. Everything all right? Just fine, Mara said, taking the package. She nodded at Ruth, ignored Caroline completely, and walked out. Her hands didn't start shaking until she was halfway back to the ranch. But she'd done it. She'd stood her ground. And it felt good, even if part of her wanted to crawl into a hole and never come out. When she got back, Dalton was waiting by the cookhouse. Heard you had words with Caroline Mitchell. Mara stopped. How do you already know about that? Ruth's husband was in the store. Rode out here to drop off some tools and couldn't wait to tell everyone. Dalton grinned. Said you made Caroline look like she'd swallowed a lemon. I wasn't trying to make a scene. Maybe not. But you stood up for yourself. That's something. His grin faded. Look, I know things have been rough. People around here, they don't like change. And you're about as much change as this place has seen in years. I didn't ask to be anyone's problem. You're not a problem. You're just different, and different scares people. He shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable. For what it's worth, I'm glad you stayed. Place runs smoother with you here. Mara blinked. Did Dalton just give me a compliment? Don't get used to it. But he was almost smiling as he walked away. That evening, Caleb showed up at the cookhouse after supper. The men had cleared out, and Mara was scrubbing the last of the pots when she heard his boots on the wooden floor. Heard you had an interesting trip to town, he said. Mara didn't look up. Word travels fast. Always does. He pulled out a chair and sat down, which was unusual. Normally, he just said what he needed to say and left. Caroline give you trouble? Nothing I couldn't handle. That's not what I asked. Mara set down the pot and turned to face him. She implied that that there was something inappropriate going on. I told her she was wrong and to mind her own business. Caleb's expression darkened. I'll talk to her. Don't. Mara surprised herself with how firm her voice was. I handled it. And if you go charging in to defend me, it'll just make everything worse. People will say I can't fight my own battles. Can you? I'm still here, aren't I? He studied her for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression. You've got more fight in you than I gave you credit for. I've had to. Yeah, I'm starting to understand that. He stood, but he didn't leave right away. For the record, I don't give a damn what Caroline Mitchell or anyone else in this town thinks. You've earned your place here. Don't ever doubt that. I'll try not to. He nodded and headed for the door, then paused with his hand on the frame. Mara? Yeah? I'm glad you stayed. He was gone before she could respond. Mara stood there in the quiet cookhouse, her hands still wet from dishwater, and felt something loosen in her chest. It wasn't happiness exactly. More like relief, like she'd been holding her breath for months and could finally let it out. The next few weeks were different. The whispers didn't stop. Mara doubted they ever would, but they didn't have the same power anymore. She'd looked the gossip in the face and refused to bend, and that changed something fundamental. The men noticed. They started including her in conversations, asking her opinion on things that had nothing to do with cooking. Garrett, the old hand with the scar, even complimented her cornbread one morning, which was the closest thing to affection she'd ever seen from him. "It's good," he said gruffly, like the words hurt coming out. "Thanks," Mara said, trying not to smile. "Don't let it go to your head." Wouldn't dream of it. Even Eli was different. He'd started bringing her things, wildflowers he'd found out on the range, a smooth stone he thought looked nice, little offerings that made her heart ache in a way she didn't quite understand. He was too young to be sweet on her, but he looked at her like she was something special, and it reminded her that there were still good people in the world. "You don't have to bring me things," she told him one afternoon. "I know, I want to." He flushed. "You're real nice, Miss Kincaid. Nicer than anyone's been to me since I left home." "Where's home?" "Missouri. Got 5 brothers. I'm the youngest. Pa said I was just another mouth to feed, so I came out here looking for work." He looked down at his boots. "Mr. Voss is fair, but he's not exactly warm, you know. You're different. You actually talk to us like we're people." Mara's throat tightened. "You are people, Eli. Don't ever think otherwise." He nodded, still not looking at her, and hurried off before she could say anything else. It was moments like that, small, unexpected kindnesses, that made her realize she was building something here. Not just a job, but a life. It was messy and complicated and nothing like she'd imagined, but it was hers. And then everything fell apart. It happened on a Tuesday. Mara was in town picking up supplies when she overheard 2 men talking outside the saloon. She wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but they were loud enough that she couldn't help it. "Voss is making a mistake keeping her around," one of them said. "Everyone knows he's just doing it because he feels guilty." "Guilty about what?" "About hiring her in the first place. She's been nothing but trouble since she got here. Stirring things up, making people uncomfortable. And now with all the talk." "What talk?" "You know, about why he really keeps her around. A man like Voss doesn't hire a woman like that unless there's something in it for him." Mara's vision went white at the edges. She turned and walked straight up to them, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. "A woman like what?" she asked, her voice deadly calm. Both men turned, their faces registering shock and then embarrassment. One of them, a stocky man with a beard that looked like it hadn't seen a comb in months, recovered first. "No offense meant, ma'am." "Then what did you mean?" "Just talking. About me. Behind my back, like cowards." She looked between them, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "You want to say something about me? Say it to my face. Tell me exactly what you think I am." The bearded man's face reddened. "Look, we weren't trying to cause trouble." "Too late. You already did." Mara took a step closer. "You think Caleb Voss hired me because he feels guilty? You think I'm too stupid or too weak to earn my place? Fine. Prove it. Right now. Let's settle this." "Settle what?" "You think I don't belong? Then let's find out. I'll challenge you to anything you want. Cooking, hauling, roping, whatever. You win, I leave town and never come back. I win, you shut your mouth about me and Caleb Voss for good." The man stared at her like she'd grown a second head. "You're serious?" "Dead serious." Oh, a crowd was starting to gather. Mara could see Ruth watching from the store window, her eyes wide. Caroline stood a few feet away, her expression somewhere between shock and satisfaction. The bearded man looked at his friend, then back at Mara. "You're crazy." "Maybe, but at least I'm not a coward who hides behind gossip." She raised her voice so everyone could hear. "Anyone else got something to say? Now's your chance." Silence, the kind that felt heavier than words. Finally, the bearded man shook his head. "This is ridiculous." "Then prove me wrong." Mara's voice was shaking now, but not with fear, with rage, with months of swallowed insults and sideways looks and whispered accusations. "Show everyone that I don't deserve to be here, or shut up and admit you're just scared of a woman who works harder than you do." The man's jaw worked, but no words came out. That's what I thought, Mara said quietly. She turned and walked away, her legs shaking so badly she wasn't sure they'd hold her, but she didn't let herself stumble. Didn't let herself cry. Not until she was back at the ranch, alone in the cookhouse, with the door closed and locked behind her. Then she sank to the floor and let it all out. She didn't know how long she sat there. Minutes, maybe. Hours. Time felt strange and elastic, like it didn't mean anything anymore. When the door rattled, she almost didn't answer. But then Caleb's voice came through, low and urgent. Mara, open the door. She dragged herself to her feet and unlocked it. He stepped inside, took one look at her face, and his expression hardened into something dangerous. Who do I need to talk to? No one. I handled it. Handled what? I just heard from half the town that you challenged someone to a contest in the middle of the street. They were talking about you, about us, saying... She stopped, her throat closing up. It doesn't matter what they were saying. It matters to me. Why? The word came out louder than she intended. Why does it matter? You've got a ranch to run, a reputation to protect. I'm just the cook. I'm replaceable. You're not replaceable. He said it like it was the most obvious thing in the world. And you're not just anything. You're... He stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. You're important. To this ranch. To the men. To me. Mara stared at him. To you? Yes. To me. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration written all over his face. I don't know how else to say it. I respect you. I trust you. And watching you walk into town and stand up to those idiots made me realize something I should have figured out a long time ago. What? That you're the strongest person I know. And if anyone's lucky to have someone in their life, it's me for having you here. The words hung in the air between them, heavy and real and terrifying. Mara's hands were shaking again, but for a different reason now. Caleb, you don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know, so you'd stop doubting yourself. Stop doubting why you're here. He stepped closer, his voice dropping. You earned this. Every single day. Don't let anyone tell you different. She couldn't speak. Couldn't think. Could only stand there and feel the weight of everything shifting, rearranging into something new. Get some rest, Caleb said finally. Tomorrow's a new day. He left, and Mara sank back down onto the floor, her mind racing. Something had changed tonight. Something fundamental and irreversible. And she had no idea what came next. Mara didn't sleep that night. She lay on her cot with her eyes open, replaying Caleb's words over and over, until they lost all meaning and became just sounds in her head. Important. He'd called her important, not useful, not competent, but important, to him. She didn't know what to do with that. By the time dawn broke, she was exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical work. She dragged herself up, splashed cold water on her face, and started breakfast like every other morning. But her hands felt clumsy, her thoughts scattered, and she burned the first batch of biscuits so badly she had to throw them out and start over. The men noticed. They always noticed. You all right? Dalton asked when she set his plate down. His voice was quieter than usual, almost concerned. Fine. You don't look fine. Well, I am. The words came out sharper than she intended. Just tired. He exchanged a look with Garrett, who was sitting across from him, but neither of them pushed. They ate in silence, and Mara was grateful for it. Caleb didn't come to breakfast. That was normal. He usually ate at the main house, but today his absence felt deliberate, like he was giving her space. Or maybe avoiding her. She couldn't tell which was worse. After the morning cleanup, Ruth showed up at the cookhouse door with a basket of eggs and a knowing expression that made Mara want to turn around and hide. Heard you caused quite a stir yesterday, Ruth said, setting the basket on the counter. News travels fast. Always does, especially when it involves someone calling out Harold Briggs in the middle of the street. Ruth leaned against the counter, her sharp eyes studying Mara's face. That took guts. Or stupidity. Haven't decided which yet. I'm voting for guts. Ruth paused. People are talking, but it's different now. Less mean. More curious, I guess. Like they're trying to figure out who you are. I'm nobody. Just a woman trying to do her job. You keep saying that, but I don't think you believe it anymore. Ruth tilted her head. And I don't think Caleb Voss believes it either. Mara's hand stilled in the dishwater. What's that supposed to mean? Means I've known Caleb since he was a boy. He's not the type to say things he doesn't mean, and the way he talked about you when he came into town this morning. She trailed off, a small smile playing at her lips. Let's just say people are starting to see what's right in front of them. There's nothing to see. If you say so. Ruth pushed off the counter. Just remember, Mara, sometimes the hardest part isn't proving yourself to everyone else. It's believing you're worth what you've earned. She left before Mara could respond. The next few days passed in a strange, suspended tension. The ranch work continued as always, meals to cook, floors to scrub, men to feed, but everything felt different. The men were careful around her now, like they were afraid she might break or explode. She couldn't tell which. Even Dalton kept his usual teasing to a minimum. Caleb kept his distance. She'd see him across the yard, talking to the hands or working on repairs. But he never came to the cookhouse. Never sought her out. It should have been a relief, but instead it felt like abandonment, like he'd said too much and was now backing away from it. On the fourth day, Mara was hauling water from the pump when she heard raised voices coming from near the barn. She set down the bucket and moved closer, staying out of sight behind the corner of the building. Don't care what you think you know, Caleb was saying, his voice hard as iron. What happens on my ranch is my business. People have a right to their opinions. That was Caroline's voice, sweet as poison. And when those opinions affect the reputation of someone we've known our whole lives, my reputation is fine. Is it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're letting sentiment cloud your judgment. That woman has caused nothing but problems since she arrived, and instead of dealing with it, I'm what? Caleb's voice dropped to something dangerous. Say it, Caroline. Tell me what you really think I'm doing. There was a long pause. When Caroline spoke again, her voice had lost some of its sweetness. I think you're lonely. I think she took advantage of that, and now you can't see what everyone else sees. And what do they see? A woman who doesn't belong here. A woman who's been nothing but trouble from the start. A woman who… Enough. The word cracked like a whip. I'm going to say this once, and I want you to listen real careful. Mara Kincaid has earned her place here 10 times over. She works harder than most men I know. She doesn't complain, doesn't make excuses, and she sure as hell doesn't need anyone's pity, especially not mine. So whatever story you and your friends have cooked up, you can take it and… Caleb? Caroline's voice softened. I'm worried about you. We all are. This isn't like you. You've always been so careful about who you let close. And then she shows up, and suddenly… Suddenly what? I treat someone with basic human decency? I recognize hard work when I see it? That's not being fooled, Caroline. That's called having a backbone. You're making a mistake, Caroline said quietly. And when it all falls apart, don't say I didn't warn you. Duly noted. Now get off my property. Footsteps. Then the sound of a horse being mounted. Mara pressed herself against the barn wall until she heard Caroline ride away. Then she waited, counting her heartbeats, trying to calm the storm of emotions churning inside her. When she finally looked around the corner, Caleb was still standing there, his back to her, his shoulders tense. For a moment she considered walking away, pretending she'd never heard anything. But something in the set of his shoulders stopped her. How long were you listening? He asked without turning around. Mara stepped out from her hiding spot. Long enough. Then you heard. Yeah, I heard. She moved closer, her arms crossed over her chest. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. Why? Caroline's right about one thing. This isn't helping either of us. The more you defend me, the more people are going to talk. He finally turned to face her, and there was something raw in his expression that made her breath catch. Let them talk. I'm tired of caring what they think. You have to care. You have a business to run, a reputation in this town. My reputation isn't worth a damn if I have to throw good people under the wagon to keep it. He took a step toward her. You think I don't know what they're saying? I know. I've always known. And I don't care. Because the truth is, you've made this place better. The men respect you. The work runs smoother. And yeah, maybe I do appreciate having someone around who doesn't treat everything like it's a battle to be won. I treat everything like a battle. Not with me, you don't. His voice softened. You're honest. You don't play games. And you sure as hell don't let anyone push you around. That's rare out here. Hell, that's rare anywhere. Mara's throat felt tight. Caleb, I'm not good at this, he said, running a hand through his hair, talking about things that matter. But I need you to understand something. When I said you were important to me, I meant it. Not because I pity you or because I'm lonely or because of whatever twisted story Caroline's spinning. I meant it because it's true. The words hung in the air between them, heavy and undeniable. Mara wanted to say something, but every response she could think of felt inadequate. I don't know what you want from me, she said finally. I want you to stop doubting yourself. Stop thinking you don't deserve to be here. He paused. And I want you to stay. Not because you need the job, but because you want to. I do want to. Then that's enough. He looked like he wanted to say more, but instead he just nodded and walked away, leaving Mara standing there with her heart pounding and her head spinning. That evening, the men were quieter than usual at supper. They ate quickly, efficiently, like they all had somewhere else they needed to be. Mara was clearing plates when Garrett spoke up. Miss Kincaid? She looked up surprised. Garrett rarely spoke unless spoken to first. Yes? Some of the boys and we've been talking. He glanced around the table, and several of the other men nodded. We know things have been rough for you lately, all the gossip and such, and we just wanted you to know that we don't buy into any of it. Mara blinked. You don't? No, ma'am. You've proven yourself to us. More than once. And anyone who says otherwise doesn't know what they're talking about. He cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable with the attention. We got your back, that's all. One by one, the other men murmured their agreement. Even Dalton, who was usually the first to crack a joke, just nodded seriously. Mara's voice caught. Thank you. That means more than you know. You've earned it, Eli said quietly. We all think so. The men filed out after that, leaving Mara alone in the cookhouse with tears burning behind her eyes. She'd spent so long fighting to prove herself that she'd forgotten what it felt like when people actually believed in her. It felt like coming home. The next morning, Mara woke with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in weeks. She was done letting gossip dictate her life. Done hiding from the truth. If Red Hollow wanted to judge her, let them. She knew who she was and what she'd accomplished, and that was enough. But first, she had unfinished business. She found Caroline at the general store, examining bolts of fabric with the same critical eye she turned on everything. Mara walked straight up to her, not bothering with pleasantries. We need to talk. Caroline looked up, surprise flickering across her face before settling into that familiar cool mask. I don't think we have anything to discuss. I disagree. Mara kept her voice level, aware that Ruth was watching from behind the counter. You've made it clear you don't like me. Fine. I'm not here to be liked, but you need to stop spreading lies about me and Caleb. I haven't lied about anything. You've implied plenty, and we both know what you're doing. Mara took a step closer. You're jealous. I get it. You've had your eye on Caleb for years, and then I show up and suddenly he's paying attention to someone who isn't you. That's got a sting. Caroline's face flushed. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? You've been trying to run me out of town since I got here, hoping that if I disappear, things will go back to the way they were. But they won't. Because even if I left tomorrow, Caleb still wouldn't want you. The words hit like a slap. Caroline's eyes went wide, then hard. How dare you? I dare because I'm tired of playing nice. I'm tired of pretending I don't see what you're doing. And I'm especially tired of you using me as a weapon against someone who doesn't deserve it. Mara's voice dropped. Caleb Voss is a good man, better than most. And if you actually cared about him instead of what he represents, you'd want him to be happy, even if that happiness doesn't include you. And I suppose you think his happiness includes you? I don't know. Maybe. Maybe not. But that's between him and me. Not you, not this town, not anyone else. Mara straightened her shoulders. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to stop spreading rumors. You're going to stop poisoning people against me. And you're going to leave Caleb alone. Do that, and we won't have any problems. And if I don't? Mara smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Then I'll make sure everyone in this town knows exactly what kind of person you are. I'll tell them about the lies you spread, the manipulation, the petty jealousy. and I'll do it loudly enough that no one will be able to ignore it." Caroline's jaw worked, but no words came out. "Your choice," Mara said simply. Then she turned and walked out of the store without looking back. Her hands were shaking by the time she reached the street, but her head was clear. She'd done it. She'd faced down the person who'd been making her life miserable and refused to back down. It felt good, terrifying, but good. That was quite a performance. Ruth had followed her out, leaning against the storefront with her arms crossed and an approving smile on her face. Thought Caroline was going to faint. She had it coming. She did. Been needing someone to put her in her place for years. Ruth's smile widened. "You're fitting in here, Mara, whether you realize it or not. Doesn't feel like fitting in. Feels like fighting every single day. Sometimes that's what fitting in looks like, especially for people like us." Ruth pushed off the wall. "Keep doing what you're doing. The rest will sort itself out." Mara walked back to the ranch with her head high, and for the first time since she'd arrived in Red Hollow, she felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. That afternoon, Caleb found her behind the cookhouse, chopping vegetables for the evening stew. He leaned against the doorframe, watching her work for a moment before speaking. "Heard you had words with Caroline." Mara didn't stop chopping. Word travels fast. Always does. Especially when it involves someone telling Caroline Mitchell to back off. There was a hint of amusement in his voice. "What did you say to her?" "The truth. That she needed to stop using me to get to you." "And how'd she take that?" "About as well as you'd expect." Mara set down the knife and turned to face him. "I'm done tiptoeing around people's feelings, Caleb. I've spent my whole life trying to make myself smaller, quieter, less threatening. I'm tired of it. If people don't like me, that's their problem." "Good." He pushed off the doorframe and walked into the kitchen. "You should have had that attitude from the start." "Easy for you to say. You've never had to fight for every scrap of respect you've gotten." "Haven't I?" He stopped a few feet away from her. "You think being orphaned at 16 and building this ranch from nothing was easy? You think the town just welcomed me with open arms because I had land?" Mara blinked. She'd never heard him talk about his past before. "I didn't know you were an orphan." "Most people don't. I don't talk about it much." He leaned against the counter. "My parents died in a fire when I was 16. Left me with a piece of land and a pile of debt. Everyone said I should sell, move on, start over somewhere easier. But I was stubborn. Worked myself half to death proving I could make something out of nothing. Took years, but I did it." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I see myself in you." He met her eyes. That same stubbornness, that same refusal to quit even when everything's stacked against you. And I know what it costs. The loneliness, the doubt, the constant fighting. Mara's chest felt tight. "Then why do you keep doing it?" "Because the alternative is giving up, and I'm not built for that." He paused. "Neither are you." They stood there in silence for a moment, the afternoon light streaming through the window and painting everything gold. Mara felt something shift between them, something she couldn't name but knew was important. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for defending me, for believing in me when no one else did." "You defended yourself," Caleb said. "I just made sure people knew where I stood." He straightened. "And for the record, I'll always stand with you, no matter what anyone says." The words settled over her like a blanket, warm and solid and real. Mara didn't know what came next, didn't know if this thing between them would grow into something more or stay exactly as it was. But for the first time since she'd arrived in Red Hollow, she wasn't afraid of the answer. That night, after the men had eaten and gone to bed, Mara sat on the cookhouse steps and looked up at the stars. They were brighter out here than they'd been anywhere else she'd lived, scattered across the sky like someone had spilled a jar of diamonds. She heard footsteps and turned to see Caleb walking toward her, 2 tin cups in his hands. "Thought you might want some coffee," he said, offering her one. "It's almost midnight." "So?" Mara took this cup and scooted over to make room for him on the steps. He sat down beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched, and for a while they just sat there in comfortable silence, drinking coffee and watching the stars. "You ever think about leaving?" Mara asked finally. "Going somewhere easier?" "Every day when I was younger. Now?" He shrugged. "This is home, for better or worse." "Yeah." Mara said softly. I'm starting to understand that feeling. Caleb looked at her, and in the starlight, his expression was softer than she'd ever seen it. I'm glad you're here, Mara. Me too. And sitting there on those weathered steps with the vast frontier stretching out before them, Mara realized something that should have terrified her but instead felt like peace. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living, and maybe, just maybe, she was starting to belong. The weeks that followed felt different. The tension that had wound through everything like a coiled spring slowly began to loosen. The ranch settled into a new rhythm, one that included Mara not just as the cook, but as someone whose opinion mattered, whose presence was valued beyond the meals she prepared. Dalton started showing up in the mornings to help with the heavy lifting before she even asked. Garrett complimented her cornbread one day, which was the closest thing to affection she'd ever seen from him. Even the new hands who'd arrived just before the storm treated her with a respect that felt earned rather than grudging. But it was Eli who surprised her most. The kid had taken to lingering after meals, asking questions that started with cooking and gradually shifted to life. Where had she come from? What had she done before Red Hollow? Did she ever think about what came next? Why all the questions? Mara asked one afternoon while teaching him how to properly knead bread dough. His technique was still terrible, too gentle, like he was petting a cat instead of working flour. I guess I'm just trying to figure things out. He pressed the dough half-heartedly. How you knew this was where you were supposed to be. I didn't. Still don't, most days. She covered his hands with hers, showing him the right pressure. Push harder. Bread needs to know you mean business. He followed her lead, and the dough started to come together properly. My pa used to say women like you were too stubborn for their own good, that you'd end up alone because no man would want to deal with all that fight. Mara felt her jaw tighten. Your pa sounds like he didn't know much about women. He didn't know much about anything, really, but I used to worry he was right. Eli kept his eyes on the dough. That being strong meant being lonely. Being strong means surviving. Everything else is just noise. Mara stepped back, letting him work on his own. You want to know the truth? I've been alone most of my life. And yeah, it's hard. But it's better than pretending to be something you're not just so people will tolerate you. Is that what you did? Before here? Mara was quiet for a moment, thinking about all the places she'd been, all the times she'd tried to make herself smaller, quieter, less. Yeah, for a while, then I got tired of it. What changed? I did. Decided I'd rather be alone and honest than surrounded by people who only liked the version of me I was pretending to be. Eli nodded slowly, his hands working the dough with more confidence now. Mr. Voss looks at you different than anyone else, like you're, I don't know, special or something. The observation caught Mara off guard. Eli, I'm not trying to pry. I just noticed, that's all. He glanced up at her, his young face serious. Is there something between you two? Mara's first instinct was to shut down the question, to tell him it was none of his business. But Eli had been kind to her from the beginning, and he deserved honesty. I don't know, she said finally. Maybe. We haven't exactly talked about it. Why not? Because talking about things makes them real, and once they're real, you can't take them back. Eli was quiet for a moment, then said softly, Sounds like you're scared. The words stung because they were true. Maybe I am. Scared of getting it wrong. Scared of losing what I've built here. Scared of being happy? Mara stopped, the question hanging in the air like smoke. Was that it? Was she afraid of being happy? She'd spent so long just trying to survive that she'd forgotten what it felt like to want more than that. Get that dough in a pan, she said, her voice rougher than she intended. It needs to rise before supper. Eli did as he was told, but the question stayed with her long after he'd gone. That evening, Caleb showed up at the cookhouse with a ledger under his arm and an expression that made Mara's stomach drop. In her experience, ledgers and serious faces meant bad news. We need to talk, he said. Those words never mean anything good. It's not bad, just important. He set the ledger on the table and gestured for her to sit. She did, reluctantly, and he sat across from her. I've been going over the ranch finances, looking at what's working and what needs to change. Am I costing you too much? No, you're the opposite of a problem. He opened the ledger, showing her columns of numbers that didn't mean much to her. Since you took over the kitchen, food costs are down 20%, efficiency is up, and I haven't had a single complaint from the men. Most of them work harder now because they actually look forward to meals. Mara frowned. So what's the problem? The problem is I've been paying you what I paid the last cook, and she was terrible. You're not. He slid a piece of paper across the table. On it was a number that made her breath stop. That's what I should be paying you. What you've earned. She stared at the number. It was almost double what she'd been making. Caleb, I can't. You can and you will. This isn't charity, Mara. This is business. You've made this ranch run better, and you deserve to be compensated fairly for that. He leaned back in his chair. But there's more. More? I've been thinking about expanding, bringing in more hands, growing the herd, maybe even buying the adjacent property if it comes available. If I do that, I'll need someone to help manage operations, supplies, schedules, finances, making sure everything runs smooth. He met her eyes. I want it to be you. Mara felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. Me? I'm just a cook. You're a hell of a lot more than that. You already do half the job without realizing it. You know what supplies we need before we run out. You know which hands work well together and which ones need to be kept apart. You keep everything organized without anyone telling you to. He paused. You're good at this, Mara. Better than anyone else I could hire, and I trust you. Trust. The word settled over her like a weight. What would that even look like? You'd still handle the kitchen. That's non-negotiable. The men would riot if anyone else took over. But you'd also work with me on the bigger picture, planning, ordering, hiring, making decisions that affect the whole ranch. He leaned forward. It'd be a partnership. You and me running this place together. Partnership. The word hung between them, loaded with meanings neither of them had the courage to say out loud. I need time to think about it, Mara said. Take all the time you need. Caleb stood, leaving the ledger on the table. But for what it's worth, I hope you say yes. This place needs you. He paused at the door. I need you. He left before she could respond, and Mara sat there in the quiet cookhouse, staring at that number and trying to understand how her life had become something she barely recognized. Sleep didn't come easy that night. Mara lay on her cot, watching shadows dance across the ceiling, thinking about everything that had happened since she'd stumbled into Red Hollow with nothing but desperation and a cast-iron skillet. She thought about the fear, the doubt, the constant battle to prove she deserved to exist in a space that didn't want her. But she also thought about the victories, the small moments of connection, the way it felt when someone looked at her and saw worth instead of burden, the way Caleb's voice had sounded when he said he needed her. And she thought about Eli's question. Are you afraid of being happy? Maybe she was. Maybe she'd spent so long in survival mode that she'd forgotten how to want anything more than making it through another day. Maybe happiness felt dangerous because it could be taken away, and losing something good hurt worse than never having it at all. But sitting there in the darkness, Mara made a decision. She was tired of being afraid, tired of holding back, tired of protecting herself from possibilities that might never happen. She was going to say yes. The next morning, she found Caleb in the barn, checking on a mare that was close to foaling. He looked up when she came in, surprise and something like hope crossing his face. I'll do it, Mara said without preamble. The job, the partnership, all of it. Relief washed over his features. Yeah? Yeah, but I have conditions. I'd expect nothing less. I want a real contract, something in writing that says exactly what my responsibilities are and what I'm being paid. I want my own space, not just a cot in the cookhouse, but an actual room with a door and a lock. And I want respect. She held his gaze. Not from you. I've already got that. But from everyone else. I want it clear that I'm not just the cook anymore. I'm your partner in running this place. Caleb nodded slowly. Done. All of it. Just like that? Just like that. He stepped closer. You're not asking for anything unreasonable, Mara. You're asking for what you're worth, and what you're worth is a hell of a lot more than you've been getting. Why are you doing this? He was quiet for a moment, his dark eyes searching hers. Because you make this place better. Because I trust you more than I've trusted anyone in years. And because... He stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. Because I care about you. More than I probably should. And I want you to stay, not because you need the job, but because you want to be here." Mara's heart hammered against her ribs. "Caleb, you don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know." But Mara found she did want to say something, needed to. "I care about you too. It scares me, but I do." His expression softened in a way she'd never seen before. "Why does it scare you?" "Because caring about things means they can hurt you, and I've been hurt enough for one lifetime." "I know. Me too." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. His palm was rough with calluses, warm and solid. "But maybe we're both tired of being scared. Maybe it's time to try something different." Mara looked down at their joined hands, marveling at how right it felt. "What if we mess it up?" "Then we mess it up. But at least we tried." He squeezed her hand gently. "I'm willing to take that risk if you are." She met his eyes and saw the honesty there, the vulnerability he rarely showed anyone, and she realized she was tired. Tired of fighting, tired of being alone, tired of protecting herself from the possibility of something good. "Okay," she said quietly. "Let's try." The smile that crossed his face was small but genuine, transforming him into someone younger, less burdened. He pulled her closer, slowly, and Mara let him. Let herself lean into the warmth of another person. Let herself believe that maybe she'd found something worth keeping. They stood there in the barn for a long moment, neither speaking, just existing in the same space without armor or pretense. Outside, the ranch was coming to life, men calling to each other, horses whinnying, the eternal sound of work that needed doing. But inside the barn, there was just the two of them and the quiet understanding that something fundamental had shifted. When they finally pulled apart, Caleb's hand lingered on hers for a moment longer. "There's one more thing," he said. "What?" "I'm having a room built onto the main house. Should be done in a few weeks. It'll be yours. Separate entrance, your own space. But close enough that we can work together without you having to walk across the yard every time." Mara felt her throat tighten. "You're serious about this?" "About all of it. The partnership, the pay. You." He squeezed her hand once more before letting go. "You've earned it, Mara. Time you started believing that." The next few weeks transformed the ranch in ways Mara hadn't expected. Word spread quickly about her new role, and the reaction was mixed. Some of the men seemed pleased, nodding their approval when they heard. Others were clearly skeptical, watching to see if she could handle the additional responsibility. But Mara had stopped worrying about proving herself to people who'd already made up their minds. She focused on the work, and the work was substantial. With Caleb's guidance, she started taking on more of the operational side, reviewing supply orders, coordinating with buyers, managing schedules. It was overwhelming at first, like trying to drink from a fire hose, but she learned fast, and she discovered she was good at it, really good. She had a head for logistics that Caleb lacked, an ability to see 3 steps ahead and plan accordingly. Where he thought in broad strokes, she thought in details. Together, they balanced each other out. The room was finished 2 weeks later, and Mara moved her few possessions from the cookhouse to the main house with a mixture of excitement and terror. It wasn't a large room, just big enough for a bed, a dresser, and a small table. But it was hers. The door had a lock. The window had real glass. And for the first time in her life, she had a space that belonged to her and no one else. That first night in her new room, she lay in bed listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the house settling around her. She could hear Caleb moving around in his own room on the other side of the house, the creak of floorboards, the sound of water being poured. It should have felt intrusive, but instead it felt comforting, like she wasn't alone anymore. The partnership worked better than either of them had expected. They fell into a rhythm, mornings spent reviewing the day's tasks over coffee, afternoons managing their separate responsibilities, evenings going over what had been accomplished and what needed attention next. They fought sometimes, usually about money or priorities or Caleb's tendency to make decisions without consulting her first. But they learned to fight fair, to listen even when they didn't want to apologize when they were wrong. And slowly, carefully, the thing between them grew into something neither of them had the words to define, but both understood was important. One evening, about a month after Mara had moved into the main house, they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset. It had become something of a ritual, the end of the workday marked by these quiet moments where they didn't have to be boss and employee or partners or anything except two people who'd found something unexpected in each other. "Ruth stopped by today," Caleb said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Yeah? What did she want?" "To tell me that people in town are taking bets on when we're going to make things official." Mara snorted. "People need better hobbies. That's what I said." He glanced at her sideways. "But it got me thinking." "About?" "About what we're doing here. What this is." He gestured between them. "We're partners. Friends. Something more than that, but less than... I don't know, it's complicated. Most things worth having are. True." He was quiet for a moment. "You ever think about what comes next?" "Next in what way?" "In every way. The ranch. Us. All of it." Mara pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. "Sometimes. Mostly I try not to think too far ahead. Gets overwhelming." "I get that. But we should probably talk about it at some point. Make sure we're on the same page." "Are we not?" "I think we are. But I'd rather know for sure than assume." He turned to face her fully. "I care about you, Mara, more than I've cared about anyone in a long time. And I want to see where this goes. But I need to know you want the same thing." Mara's heart was racing. "I do. Want the same thing. I mean, I'm not good at this. At letting people in. At believing things can work out." "Me neither. But we're both here, aren't we?" "Both trying. That's got to count for something." "It does." She reached over and took his hand, the gesture feeling both natural and terrifying. "I don't know what comes next, Caleb, but I know I want to figure it out with you." He squeezed her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her skin. "That's enough for now." They sat there as the sun finished setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple and deep blue. And for the first time in her life, Mara let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she deserved this. The peace, the partnership, the possibility of something more. The town's reaction to her new role was mixed at best. Some people seemed genuinely pleased, nodding their approval when they saw her in town. Others were openly skeptical, making comments loud enough for her to hear about women getting ideas above their station. Caroline was in the second camp. Mara ran into her at the general store about 6 weeks after accepting Caleb's offer, and the encounter was as unpleasant as expected. "So it's true," Caroline said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "You're not just cooking anymore, you're running things now." "Helping run things," Mara corrected, keeping her voice level. "It's a partnership." "How convenient for you. Must be nice, going from nothing to half owner of one of the biggest ranches in the county." "I'm not half owner, and I worked for what I have." "Did you?" Caroline's smile sharpened. "Or did you just get lucky? Find a lonely man and make yourself indispensable?" Mara felt anger flash hot in her chest, but she forced it down. "You know what, Caroline? I'm not doing this. I'm not going to stand here and defend myself to someone who's determined to think the worst of me no matter what I do." "Because you know I'm right." "No. Because I'm tired of wasting energy on people who don't matter." Mara picked up the supplies she'd come for. "You want to believe I manipulated my way into this position? Fine. But we both know the truth. And the truth is that Caleb sees value in me that you refuse to acknowledge. That must be hard for you." Caroline's face flushed red. "You have no idea what you're talking about." "Don't I?" Mara leaned in closer, lowering her voice. "I know you've been trying to catch Caleb's attention for years. I know you thought you had some kind of claim on him just because you've known him since you were kids. And I know it kills you that he chose to partner with me instead of you." "He didn't choose you. You just happened to be there." "Keep telling yourself that if it helps you sleep at night." Mara straightened. "But here's the thing, I'm not going anywhere, so you can either accept that and move on, or you can keep making yourself miserable. Either way, it doesn't affect me anymore." She walked out before Caroline could respond, her hands shaking but her head clear. Ruth caught up with her outside. "Heard some of that?" Ruth said, falling into step beside her. "You handled it better than I would have." "I'm tired of her, tired of all of it." "I know, but you stood your ground. That's what matters." Ruth paused. "For what it's worth, most people in town think you're good for Caleb, good for the ranch. Caroline's just loud about her opinions, so it seems like more people agree with her than actually do." I don't care what most people think. Maybe you should. You've earned their respect, Mara, even the ones who didn't want to give it to you at first. Mara looked at Ruth, this woman who'd been one of the first to treat her like a person instead of a problem. Thank you for believing in me when you didn't have to. Thank me by keeping that ranch running smooth and keeping Caleb Voss from working himself to death. That's all the thanks I need. The months that followed settled into a pattern that felt almost like normalcy. The ranch prospered under their joint management. They brought in 3 new hands to help with the expanded herd, and Mara found herself involved in the hiring process, sitting beside Caleb as they interviewed candidates and discussed who would fit best with the existing crew. The men adapted to the new dynamic faster than expected. At first, there was some grumbling about taking orders from a woman, but Mara had learned that the best way to earn respect was to know what you were talking about and not back down when challenged. Within a few weeks, even the most skeptical hands were coming to her with questions and concerns, recognizing that she knew the operation as well as Caleb did. Eli continued to seek her out, and their conversations deepened. He told her about his family back in Missouri, about the brothers who'd made him feel small and the father who'd never seen his worth. Mara told him about her own past. Not all of it, but enough. The mother who'd worked herself to death, the places she'd been before Red Hollow, the years of feeling like she didn't fit anywhere. You fit here, Eli said one afternoon while helping her prep vegetables. He'd become surprisingly good in the kitchen, his initial clumsiness replaced with competence. Most days I believe that. And the other days? The other days I remember that fitting in and belonging aren't always the same thing. Eli was quiet for a moment. You belong here, Miss Kincaid, even if you don't always feel like it. The simple certainty in his voice made her throat tight. When'd you get so wise? Been learning from you, I guess. She reached over and ruffled his hair, the gesture affectionate and almost motherly. You're going to make something of yourself, kid. I can tell. His face lit up in a way that reminded her how young he still was. You really think so? I know so. The relationship between her and Caleb continued to deepen in ways that felt both inevitable and terrifying. They worked well together, but it was more than that. They talked late into the night about things that mattered, dreams and fears, and the weight of responsibility. They learned each other's tells, the signs of stress or worry or anger. They figured out how to give each other space when needed and support when asked. And sometimes, in moments neither of them planned, they'd find themselves standing close enough to touch, looking at each other with something that went beyond partnership or friendship. Those moments stretched out, heavy with possibility, until one of them would break the tension with a comment or a joke, or by walking away. It couldn't last. They both knew it. But neither of them seemed ready to be the first to cross that line. Until one night when everything changed. It was late autumn when the second storm hit, bigger and meaner than the first. The sky had been threatening for days, dark clouds building on the horizon like an army preparing for battle. Caleb had everyone working double time to secure the property, bringing in livestock, reinforcing structures, stocking supplies. The air felt heavy, charged with electricity that made the horses nervous and the men jumpy. Mara worked alongside them, helping to move supplies into the storm cellar, boarding up windows, making sure the cookhouse was stocked with enough food to last a week if necessary. She'd been through the last storm, knew what was coming, but this felt different, bigger, more dangerous. This is going to be bad, Dalton said as they hauled the last of the emergency supplies into the main house. His face was grim, all his usual humor stripped away. How bad? Worst I've seen in 10 years, maybe more. He looked at the sky, squinting at the dark mass rolling toward them. Boss is right to batten everything down. We're going to need it. By the time the rain started, they were as ready as they could be. But ready didn't mean much when nature decided to throw a tantrum. The storm hit just after dark, and it was like someone had opened the gates of hell. Wind that didn't just blow but screamed, tearing at everything not nailed down and testing everything that was. Rain so heavy it turned the world into a solid gray wall of water. Thunder that shook the ground and rattled bones. Lightning that split the sky in jagged white scars, illuminating the chaos for brief, terrifying moments. Everyone huddled inside, listening to the ranch get battered. The men were in the bunkhouse. The women who'd come to work at the ranch were in their quarters attached to the cookhouse, and Mara was in the main house with Caleb, watching through the window as their world got torn apart. "It's going to be okay," Caleb said, but even he didn't sound convinced. On the second night, part of the barn roof tore off with a sound like a cannon blast. Caleb was up and moving before Mara could stop him, pulling on his coat and hat. "Where are you going?" "That's the barn. If we don't secure it, we'll lose the whole structure. The horses, I'm coming with you." "No." His voice was firm. "It's too dangerous." "Then it's too dangerous for you too." "Mara, don't." She was already pulling on her own coat. "We're partners. That means I don't let you go out there alone." His jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. They went out together with Dalton, Garrett, and 3 other hands, fighting their way through wind and rain that felt like being beaten with fists. The barn was a disaster. Half the roof peeled back, rain pouring in, horses screaming in terror. They worked for 2 hours in conditions that would have killed weaker people, securing tarps, moving horses to safer stalls, shoring up what could be saved, and abandoning what couldn't. Mara's hands were raw, her body soaked through, her muscles screaming, but she didn't stop, couldn't stop. It was Caleb who got hurt. A piece of debris, a board torn from somewhere, flying like a spear, caught him across the forehead. He went down hard, and Mara's heart stopped. "Caleb!" She was at his side in seconds, Dalton right behind her. Blood was streaming down his face, dark in the intermittent lightning flashes. "I'm fine," he said, trying to stand. "You're not fine. You're bleeding." Mara got under his shoulder, helping him up. "We're going back, now." Dalton and Garrett finished the work while Mara half-carried, half-dragged Caleb back to the main house. By the time they got inside, they were both shaking, from cold, from exhaustion, from fear. She pushed him into a chair in the kitchen and fetched water and bandages, her hands trembling so badly she almost dropped everything. "It's nothing," Caleb said, wincing as she started cleaning the wound. "It's a gash that needs stitches. Hold still." "Mara, I said hold still." Her voice came out sharper than she intended, but she was terrified. Terrified of how much blood there was. Terrified of how close he'd come to being seriously hurt. Terrified of how much it would destroy her if something happened to him. He must have heard something in her voice because he went quiet, letting her work. The gash was deep but clean. She stitched it carefully, her hands steadier now that she had something to focus on. The other men had made it back safely and disappeared to the bunkhouse, leaving just the 2 of them in the kitchen. Outside, the storm continued its assault, but inside there was an odd pocket of calm. "You're good at this," Caleb said after a while, watching her work. "At what? Patching up idiots who go out in storms? At taking care of people? At keeping your head when everything's falling apart?" He reached up and caught her wrist gently. "At being exactly what I need when I need it." Mara's hands paused. "Caleb, I meant what I said before. About caring about you. About wanting to see where this goes." His dark eyes searched hers, intense even with blood dried on his temple and exhaustion pulling at his features. "I'm tired of pretending it's just business between us. Tired of acting like you're just my partner in running this place when you're so much more than that." Her breath caught. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm in love with you. Have been for months, maybe longer. I don't know when it started, but I know it's real, and I'm done being too scared to admit it." The words hung in the air between them, impossible to take back. Mara stood frozen, the needle still in her hand, her mind racing. This was the moment, the cliff edge. She could step back, keep things safe and professional and contained. Or she could jump. "You don't have to say anything," Caleb added quickly, misreading her silence. "I just needed you to know, needed to stop being a coward about it. If you don't feel the same way, we can forget. I'm in love with you too." The admission felt like stepping off that cliff, terrifying and exhilarating and inevitable all at once. Caleb went very still. "You are?" "Yeah, I am. Have been for—" She set down the needle with shaking hands. "I don't know. A while. I kept telling myself it was just respect, just partnership, just anything other than what it actually was. Because loving someone means they can hurt you, and I've been hurt enough. I would never— I know. That's what scares me most. You're good, Caleb, better than anyone I've ever known. And if this doesn't work out, if I mess it up somehow, it'll be my fault. Not because you did anything wrong, but because I don't know how to be the kind of person someone like you should be with." He stood slowly, taking the bandages from her hands and setting them aside. Then he cupped her face in his palms, his touch gentle, despite the calluses and the dirt and the dried blood. "You sure about that?" he asked softly. "Because from where I'm standing, you're exactly the kind of person I should be with. Strong, honest, brave enough to face down storms, and stubborn enough to build something from nothing. You think I want someone soft and easy? I don't. I want you, exactly as you are. Even with all my rough edges? Especially with your rough edges." He smiled, and it transformed his whole face. "You make me better, Mara. Make this place better. Make everything better just by being in it." She wanted to argue, wanted to list all the ways she was wrong for him, but the words died in her throat. Because maybe he was right. Maybe she'd been so busy protecting herself from disappointment that she'd missed the obvious truth. They fit. In all their broken, complicated, difficult pieces, they fit together. "So what now?" she whispered. "Now we stop fighting it. Stop pretending. Stop being scared." He leaned closer, his forehead nearly touching hers. "Now we see what happens when we're brave enough to try." "I'm terrified." "Me too. But I'm more terrified of waking up 10 years from now and wondering what could have been if I'd just had the guts to tell you how I felt." Mara closed the last bit of distance between them, pressing her lips to his. The kiss was everything she'd imagined and nothing like it, awkward at first because they were both out of practice and nervous, but then settling into something that felt right. His hands moved to her waist, pulling her closer. Her fingers tangled in his hair, careful of the wound she'd just stitched. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. "That was," Caleb started. "Long overdue," Mara finished. He laughed, the sound rough but genuine. "Yeah, that." They stood there in the kitchen, holding each other while the storm raged outside, and Mara felt something inside her settle. All the fighting, all the fear, all the desperate need to prove she deserved to exist, it all quieted. Because here, in Caleb's arms, she didn't have to prove anything. She just had to be. The storm finally broke on the fourth day, leaving behind a landscape transformed. The ranch had taken a beating, several structures damaged, fences down, the barn roof a total loss. But they were alive, and the livestock were mostly safe, and the damage was all fixable. The cleanup took weeks. Everyone pitched in, working from dawn to dusk to repair what the storm had broken. And through it all, Mara and Caleb navigated their new reality, partners in work and in something more, learning how to be together in ways that went beyond business. It wasn't always smooth. They were both used to being independent, to making decisions alone, to not having to consider someone else's feelings. They fought about stupid things, who'd forgotten to order supplies, whether to hire a new hand or wait, how to approach a difficult conversation with one of the workers. But they also learned to apologize, to compromise, to remember that being on the same side mattered more than being right. The ranch hands noticed the change, of course. Dalton made one comment, "About damn time you two figured it out." And that was it. The others just accepted it with varying degrees of amusement or approval. Even Eli seemed pleased, though he turned bright red whenever he saw them standing close together. The town's reaction was more complicated. Some people were genuinely happy for them, coming by to offer congratulations or approval. Others clearly thought it was scandalous. A woman living openly with a man she wasn't married to, running a ranch as if she had any right. Caroline was in the second camp. When word reached her, she showed up at the ranch unannounced, her face tight with anger. "I need to speak with you," she said to Caleb, ignoring Mara completely. "Privately." "Anything you have to say to me, you can say in front of Mara," Caleb replied, his voice pleasant but firm. "Fine." Caroline's eyes flashed. "Are you out of your mind? Living in sin with that woman, making a mockery of everything decent people value?" "Careful," Caleb said, his voice dropping to something dangerous. "Real careful what you say next. Everyone's talking about it, about how she's bewitched you, how you've lost all sense of propriety. Enough." He took a step forward and Caroline actually backed up. "I'm going to say this once, so listen good. What Mara and I do is none of your business. Not yours, not the town's, not anyone's. We're partners, in business and in life. And if that bothers you or anyone else, I don't give a damn. Your reputation? My reputation is fine. And if it wasn't, I'd rather be happy with a damaged reputation than miserable with a spotless one. He crossed his arms. Now get off my property, and don't come back unless you're ready to treat Mara with the respect she deserves. Caroline's face went pale, then red. She opened her mouth to respond, then seemed to think better of it. She turned on her heel and left, her back rigid with fury. That probably made things worse, Mara said once she was gone. Don't care. Caleb turned to her. I'm done letting people like her dictate how we live. We've bent enough. Time to stop bending. Ruth's reaction was different. She showed up the next day with a basket of supplies and a knowing smile. Heard you two finally figured it out, she said, setting the basket on the kitchen table. Word travels fast, Mara replied, but she was smiling too. Always does. Especially when it's good news. Ruth looked between them, her expression softening. I'm happy for you. Both of you. You're good together. You think so? Mara asked, surprised by how much she needed to hear it. I know so. Been watching you two dance around each other for months. Was starting to wonder if I'd have to lock you in a room together and not let you out until you admitted how you felt. She squeezed Mara's hand. You deserve this. Deserve to be happy. Don't let anyone tell you different. Over the next few months, the relationship between Mara and Caleb deepened in ways that felt both natural and miraculous. They learned each other's rhythms, when to push and when to give space, when to joke and when to be serious, when to work together and when to work separately. They had their first real fight about money. Caleb thought they should invest in more cattle Mara wanted to save for potential emergencies, and learned how to fight fair. They celebrated small victories and weathered small disappointments as a team, and slowly, the town began to accept them. Not everyone. There would always be people like Caroline who saw scandal where there was just love. But enough. The baker started giving them a discount when they came in together. The man who ran the feed store asked how they were doing in a way that felt genuine. Even the preacher, who Mara had avoided after that disastrous social, nodded politely when they passed on the street. It was Eli who asked the question that had been hovering over everything. You two going to get married? He asked one evening, helping Mara with the dinner cleanup. He'd taken to staying after meals sometimes, preferring the company of the main house to the bunkhouse. Mara nearly dropped the plate she was washing. That's not really your business, kid. I know. I'm just curious. Everyone else is too, but they're too polite to ask. He scrubbed at a stubborn pot. Not that it matters. I mean, you're already acting like a married couple. Just wondered if you'd make it official. We haven't talked about it. Why not? Because it's complicated. How? Mara set down the plate and turned to face him. Because marriage means different things to different people. For some, it's just a legal contract. For others, it's a promise. And for people like me who've spent their whole lives being told they're not the marrying kind, it's complicated. Eli was quiet for a moment. You think you're not the marrying kind? I think I never expected to be. Never saw myself as someone who'd fit into that role. But you fit with Mr. Voss. That's different. How? Mara didn't have a good answer for that. Because Eli was right. She did fit with Caleb in ways she'd never fit with anyone else. So why did the idea of marriage feel so loaded? That night, after Eli had gone back to the bunkhouse, Caleb found her on the porch, staring out at the stars. What's on your mind? He asked, settling beside her. Eli asked if we were going to get married. What did you tell him? That it was complicated. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Is it complicated, I mean? I don't know, maybe. Mara pulled her knees up to her chest. I've never thought about marriage much. Always figured it wasn't for someone like me. Someone like you? Someone who doesn't fit. Who's too big, too loud, too much. She shook her head. I know that sounds stupid. It doesn't sound stupid. It sounds like you've been listening to the wrong people for too long. He took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her skin. You want to know what I think? What? I think marriage is just a word. It can mean whatever we want it to mean. For some people, it's about religion or tradition or family expectations. But for us, it could just be a way of saying, you're mine and I'm yours, and we're building this life together. He paused. But only if you want it. I'm happy with what we have now, if that's enough for you. Is it enough for you? He was quiet for a long moment. Honestly, I'd like to marry you. Not because I think we need a piece of paper to prove anything, but because I want the world to know you're mine. Want to stand up in front of everyone and say, this woman is my partner, my equal, my choice. But if you're not ready, or if you don't want that, I'm not going anywhere. Mara felt tears prick at her eyes. You make it sound so simple. Maybe it is. Maybe we're the ones making it complicated. She thought about that. About all the ways she'd been taught to see herself as less than, as not enough, as too much. And about how Caleb had never seen her that way. He'd seen her strength, her competence, her worth. He'd made her a partner when she was just a cook. He'd put her name on the deed when she'd still been afraid to hope for permanence. He'd loved her not despite who she was, but because of it. Okay, she said quietly. Okay, what? Let's get married. The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise. Yeah? Yeah. But on one condition. What's that? We do it our way. Not the town's way, not tradition's way. Ours, small, simple. Just the people who matter. Deal. He pulled her close, and she let herself lean into him, let herself believe that this, all of this, was real and hers and not going anywhere. They married in the spring, 6 months after that conversation. Not in the church, which would have required bending to expectations they had no interest in meeting, but on the ranch itself. Ruth stood up with Mara, and Dalton stood with Caleb. The ranch hands were there, all of them cleaned up and wearing their best clothes. A few people from town who'd become genuine friends made the trip out. Sarah and the other women who worked on the ranch stood together, watching with expressions that ranged from happy to hopeful to wistful. The preacher from town had refused to officiate, said it set a bad precedent, a woman who'd been living in sin suddenly being rewarded with legitimacy. But the circuit judge who came through twice a year had no such qualms. He performed the ceremony with efficiency and warmth, asking them to state their vows clearly enough for everyone to hear. I promise to be your partner, Caleb said, his voice steady and sure. In work and in life. To respect your strength and trust your judgment. To stand beside you, not in front of you or behind you, but beside you. To love you for who you are, not who I think you should be. And to build a life with you that's worthy of everything you've overcome to get here. Mara's throat was tight, but she managed to speak. I promise to be your equal, to challenge you when you're wrong and support you when you're right. To work beside you to build something that matters. To trust you with my fears and my hopes and the parts of me I've kept hidden from everyone else. And to love you, not because you saved me, but because you saw me and chose me anyway. When the judge pronounced them married and told Caleb he could kiss his bride, the cheer that went up from the assembled group was loud enough to startle the horses. The kiss was sweet and slightly awkward because they were both self-conscious about doing it in front of an audience, but it was real. And when they pulled apart, Mara saw tears in Ruth's eyes, pride on Dalton's face, and genuine happiness from everyone gathered. They celebrated with a meal that Mara had helped prepare, but hadn't cooked herself. Sarah and the other women had insisted on that much at least. There was music from a fiddle player who worked on a neighboring ranch, and dancing that went on until the stars came out. At one point, Mara found herself standing on the porch of the main house, her house, legally and truly now in every possible way, watching the celebration. Ruth appeared beside her, 2 glasses of whiskey in hand. Here, Ruth said, offering one. You've earned it. Have I? Built a life from nothing, earned the respect of people who didn't want to give it, found love with a good man. Yeah, I'd say you've earned it. Ruth clinked her glass against Mara's. To you, and to proving everyone wrong who said you couldn't do it. They drank, and the whiskey burned warm all the way down. You know what I realized today? Mara said after a moment. What? I'm happy, genuinely, truly happy. I didn't think that was possible for someone like me. Someone like you, Ruth repeated. You mean someone strong? Someone who doesn't take nonsense from anyone? Someone who works harder than most men and does it better? She shook her head. The world tried to tell you that strength and happiness can't coexist for women, but you proved them wrong. That's what you do, Mara. You prove everyone wrong. The celebration wound down eventually, and the guests departed one by one. Dalton was the last to leave, shaking Caleb's hand and giving Mara a surprisingly genuine smile. You're good for him, he said simply. Both of you are good for each other. Don't let anyone tell you different. When it was finally just the two of them, Caleb and Mara stood on the porch and watched the moon rise over the hills. So, Caleb said, how does it feel to be Mrs. Voss? Mara considered. Strange. Good. Terrifying. All of the above. She looked at him. How does it feel to be married to me? Like the smartest thing I've ever done. He pulled her close. Come on, let's go inside. Long day tomorrow. But before they went in, Mara took one last look at the ranch spread out before them. The buildings they'd repaired together, the fences they'd mended, the land they'd worked to make prosperous. It was theirs. Not his, not hers, but theirs. Built together, earned together, owned together. And standing there in the moonlight with her husband's arm around her waist, Mara Kincaid Voss knew she'd finally found what she'd been searching for all along. Home. Real, genuine, unshakable home. The years that followed were good ones, though never easy. Success didn't mean the work got lighter. If anything, it meant more responsibility, more decisions, more ways things could go wrong. But they faced it all as partners, and that made the difference. They expanded the ranch again, buying adjacent property when it became available. They improved the breeding program, invested in better equipment, built new structures. The operation grew from 12 hands to 20, then 30. They had to hire a foreman to help manage day-to-day operations, and Mara spent more time on the business side while Caleb focused on the land and livestock. But she never gave up the kitchen entirely. It was her sanctuary, the place where she'd first proved herself. She still cooked big meals sometimes, especially when new people joined the operation or when celebrations called for something special. And she still trained the women who came through, teaching them not just how to cook, but how to manage, how to lead, how to see themselves as valuable beyond traditional roles. Those women were one of Mara's proudest accomplishments. Word had spread that the Voss Ranch was a place where women could go to rebuild their lives, and they came in a steady stream, fleeing bad marriages, escaping poverty, running from pasts that had tried to crush them. Mara gave them the same chance Caleb had given her. Prove yourself for a week, and if you can hack it, you've got a job and a future. Most of them rose to meet the challenge. Some stayed on permanently, becoming part of the ranch's core team. Others moved on after a year or two, taking skills and confidence with them to build lives elsewhere. But they all left stronger than they'd arrived, and that mattered more than anything. Sarah had become the head cook, managing a kitchen that now fed dozens of people multiple times a day. Her younger sister had married one of the ranch hands and started a family. Two other women who'd come through had pooled their savings and bought a small property together, starting their own operation with advice and occasional financial backing from Mara and Caleb. It was a legacy Mara had never imagined building, but one she was fiercely proud of. Eli kept his word. He stayed at the ranch for 2 years after their conversation, learning everything he could. When the time came, Mara and Caleb helped him buy a modest piece of land and get set up with starter livestock and equipment. They structured it as a loan with favorable terms, and Eli paid them back over the next 5 years with a combination of money and labor, helping out at their ranch during busy seasons. His place thrived, and true to his promise, when a young man showed up at his door years later looking for work and a fresh start, Eli gave him the same chance Mara had given him. The cycle continued. About 3 years into their marriage, Caleb started talking about building a school. The area was growing, and there were enough families now that it made sense to have formal education available locally. But more than that, he wanted to create something that reflected their values, a place where girls could learn business and practical skills alongside traditional academics, where everyone understood that education opened doors regardless of gender. "What do you think?" he asked Mara one evening as they reviewed the proposed plans. She studied the drawings, a small but well-designed building with space for classrooms and a workshop area. "I think it's a good idea, great even, but it's going to be expensive. We can afford it, especially if we get some of the other ranchers to pitch in. This benefits everyone." "Who would teach?" "I was thinking we could hire someone for the academic stuff, reading, writing, arithmetic, but you could teach the practical business classes, management, bookkeeping, negotiation, the things you've learned running this place." Mara felt her chest tighten. "You want me to be a teacher?" "Why not? You're already teaching the women who come through here. This would just formalize it, give you a chance to reach more people, She thought about it, about all the things she'd learned the hard way because no one had thought to teach her, about how different her life might have been if someone had shown her that women could run businesses, manage money, make decisions that mattered beyond the domestic sphere. "Okay," she said, "let's do it." The school was built over the next year, funded jointly by the Vosses and 3 neighboring ranches who saw the value in educating their workers' children. They hired a young teacher from back east, a woman named Margaret Hartley, who believed passionately in education for all and had radical ideas about what girls should be learning. Mara taught 2 afternoons a week, focusing on practical business skills. She taught bookkeeping and budgeting, negotiation and management, how to read contracts and spot unfavorable terms. She taught girls to see themselves as capable of more than just marriage and motherhood. Not that there was anything wrong with those choices if that's what they wanted, but they should know they had options. The classes were popular beyond expectation. Girls came from as far as 10 miles away, eager to learn skills their mothers had never dreamed of having. Some of the boys came too, curious about this woman rancher who ran one of the most successful operations in the territory. And Mara discovered she loved teaching, loved watching understanding dawn on young faces, loved answering questions that started with, "But I'm just a girl, can I really?" and being able to say, "Yes, you can. Let me show you how." 5 years into their marriage, on a quiet spring evening, Mara and Caleb sat on their porch and took stock of everything they'd built. The ranch was thriving. The school was educating a new generation. The women who'd passed through their doors were scattered across the territory, building their own lives, and many of them stayed in touch, writing letters about their successes and challenges. "You ever regret it?" Caleb asked. "Taking the risk on Red Hollow? On me?" Mara thought about it seriously. "No, not even on the hard days. This is exactly where I'm supposed to be." "Me too." He took her hand, squeezing gently. "I've been thinking about something." "What?" "We've built something good here, something that's going to outlast us. But I want to make sure it continues the way we intended. I want to legally establish the program for helping women, create a formal structure so that no matter what happens to us, the ranch will continue to be a place where women can come to rebuild their lives." Mara felt tears prick at her eyes. "You'd do that?" "We'd do that. Together. It's as much your legacy as mine. More, really." He turned to face her fully. "I want to set aside funds specifically for that purpose. Create guidelines for how it operates. Make it so that even after we're gone, other women will have the same chance you had." That's, she couldn't find the words. "That's the best thing you've ever said to me." They worked with lawyers over the next several months, establishing what they called the Voss Legacy Fund. It set aside a percentage of the ranch's profits specifically for helping women get back on their feet, providing wages during training, small loans for starting businesses, educational support. The guidelines were clear. Any woman willing to work hard and prove herself would be given a genuine chance, regardless of her past or circumstances. When the paperwork was finalized, Mara held the documents in her hands and felt something settle deep in her chest. This was permanent. This was real. This was a promise that what they'd built would continue. 8 years into their marriage, Ruth died. It was sudden, a heart problem no one had known about. One day she was her usual sharp, funny self, and the next day she was gone. Mara took it hard. Ruth had been her first real friend in Red Hollow, the first person to see her as someone worth knowing instead of someone to be tolerated. She'd stood up at their wedding. She'd celebrated every victory and offered wisdom during every setback. At the funeral, Mara gave a eulogy that made half the town cry. "Ruth Fletcher saw people," she said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "Really saw them. Not who they pretended to be or who society said they should be, but who they actually were. She saw me when I was nobody, when I had nothing, when I'd given up on the idea that anyone would ever look at me and see value. And she treated me like I mattered, like I was worth knowing. That changed my life. Changed who I became." She paused, looking around at the assembled crowd. "The best way to honor Ruth is to do what she did. See people. Really see them. Give them the chance she gave me. That's the legacy she left, and it's one worth continuing." After the funeral, Mara and Caleb walked home in silence. When they reached the porch, Mara finally broke down, sobbing against his chest while he held her, and let her grieve. "She believed in me when no one else did," Mara said through her tears. She made me feel like I deserved to be here. You do deserve to be here. You always did. Caleb stroked her hair gently. Ruth knew that. She just made sure you knew it too. The ranch continued to evolve. A decade after Mara's arrival, they were one of the most successful operations in the territory, known not just for their livestock, but for their progressive practices. They were the first ranch in the area to implement profit sharing with long-term employees. They built decent housing for workers instead of cramped bunkhouses. They paid fair wages and treated people with dignity. Other ranchers thought they were crazy at first, but when the Voss Ranch had lower turnover, higher productivity, and better quality output than their competitors, some of them started paying attention. A few even adopted similar practices. Mara and Caleb were invited to speak at agricultural meetings, to advise other operations, to share what they'd learned. Mara discovered she was good at this too, presenting ideas, making arguments, winning people over. She became known in her own right, not as Caleb Voss's wife, but as Mara Voss, rancher and businesswoman. It was strange and wonderful and terrifying all at once. 12 years after arriving in Red Hollow, Mara was asked to give the keynote address at the Territorial Agricultural Conference. It was a big honor, the first time a woman had been given that platform. Some people were outraged, but the conference organizers held firm, and Mara prepared a speech that she hoped would matter. She stood at the podium in front of 200 ranchers, businessmen, and agricultural officials, and spoke about the future she wanted to see. For too long, she said, her voice carrying across the room, we've operated under the assumption that success in this territory requires a certain kind of toughness, a willingness to grind people down, to extract every ounce of value without regard for the cost. We've told ourselves that paying fair wages or providing decent conditions or treating workers with dignity is soft, weak, bad business. She paused, letting that sink in. I'm here to tell you that's garbage. The Voss Ranch is proof that you can be profitable and humane, that you can build something successful without breaking the people who work for you, that treating employees as partners instead of resources isn't just the right thing to do, it's smart business. She went on to share specifics, their profit-sharing model, their retention rates, their productivity numbers. She talked about the women's program and how it had brought skilled workers to the ranch who might otherwise have been overlooked. She talked about the school and how educating the next generation would benefit everyone, and she ended with a challenge. You can keep doing things the old way. Keep grinding people down. Keep treating workers as disposable. Keep telling yourselves that success requires ruthlessness. Or you can try something different. You can build operations that are profitable and humane. You can create legacies that are about more than just money. The choice is yours. But I'm telling you, there's a better way. And we've proven it works. The response was mixed. Half the room gave her a standing ovation. The other half looked like they'd bitten into something sour. But she'd said what needed saying, and she didn't regret a word. That night, back at the hotel, Caleb found her on the balcony, looking out at the city lights. That was quite a speech, he said. Probably made some enemies. Probably made some allies too, and you definitely made people think. He stood beside her. I'm proud of you. Always am, but especially today. I'm just tired of pretending things can't change, tired of accepting that this is the way things have to be. She leaned against him. We've proven there's another way. Other people should know that. They do now. 15 years after arriving in Red Hollow, Mara stood on the porch of her home and looked out at everything she'd built. The ranch sprawled across the valley, prosperous and thriving. Multiple buildings, dozens of employees, livestock that was known for quality throughout the territory. The school was flourishing, educating children from miles around. The women's program had helped more than 50 women rebuild their lives. And she wasn't just a cook anymore. Wasn't just Caleb's wife or his partner. She was Mara Voss, rancher, businesswoman, teacher, advocate, someone whose opinion mattered, someone people sought out for advice, someone who'd built a legacy that would outlast her. Caleb came out to join her, 2 cups of coffee in hand. It had become their ritual over the years, ending the day together, watching the sun set, taking stock of what they'd accomplished and what still needed doing. You're thinking about something, he said, handing her a cup. Just reflecting about how far we've come, how different everything is from when I first got here. You have any regrets? Not even one. She sipped her coffee. You? Only that I didn't tell you I loved you sooner would have saved us both some time and worry. Mara smiled. We got there eventually. That we did. He set down his cup and pulled her close. I love you, Mara Voss. Love everything you've built, everything you've become, everything you've made possible. We've built, she corrected. We've become. We've made possible. Fair enough? He kissed the top of her head. You know what I realized today? What? We're not just running a ranch anymore. We're changing the world. Maybe just our little corner of it, but still. We're proving that things can be different, better. That success doesn't require cruelty. That women can do everything men can do, and often do it better. That giving people chances creates value instead of destroying it. Mara felt tears prick at her eyes. You really think we're changing the world? I know we are. One person at a time, one decision at a time, one woman given a chance she wouldn't have had anywhere else. He tightened his arms around her. That matters, Mara. What we've built here matters. They stood there as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and deep purple. And Mara thought about the woman she'd been when she first stepped off that stagecoach, desperate, afraid, convinced she'd never find a place in the world that wanted her. That woman would barely recognize who she'd become. Wouldn't believe that she could own land, run a business, teach others, build a legacy. Wouldn't believe that someone like Caleb could see her and choose her and love her exactly as she was. But that woman had been wrong about a lot of things. Wrong about what she deserved. Wrong about what was possible. Wrong about who she could become. The frontier hadn't broken her. She'd conquered it, reshaped it, made it bend to her will. She'd built something that would outlast her, a ranch that thrived, a program that helped women find their strength, a school that educated the next generation, a legacy of proving that things could be different. And she'd done it not by becoming someone else, but by becoming more fully herself, by refusing to shrink or hide or apologize for taking up space in the world. What are you thinking about? Caleb asked softly. Everything, nothing, how lucky I am, how grateful. She turned to look at him. How much I love you and this life we've built. Me too. He kissed her, gentle and sure. Me too. They went inside eventually, leaving the porch and the sunset behind. But before she closed the door, Mara took one last look at the land that had become hers, not through luck or charity or someone else's kindness, but through sheer determination and the refusal to quit. She'd arrived in Red Hollow with nothing but a skillet and stubborn hope. She was leaving behind a legacy that would change lives for generations. And standing there in the doorway of her home, with her husband's hand in hers and the vast frontier stretching out before them, Mara Kincaid Voss knew one thing with absolute certainty. She'd finally found what she'd been searching for all along. Not acceptance, not approval, not even belonging, though she had that now too. She'd found herself, the truest, strongest version of who she'd always been meant to be. And that, more than anything else, was worth fighting for. The end.